Before DS Irae came out in English, I was more than aware of its intense hype by the JOPs, or Japanese only readers, that it was apparently the premier chuuni visual novel. I figured as someone who liked Fate Stay Night well enough, if DS Irae was basically just Fate Stay Night but replacing servants with magic Nazi villains, it would be fine enough, hopefully on Fate's level. Unfortunately, that ended up not being the case. As the video title says, DS Irae basically wasn't for me. My idea of what Chuunige was just over-the-top magic and stuff, but apparently I underestimated how over-the-top chuuni actually gets. But before I get too critical, there are a handful of things I actually do like about DS Irae and why I don't outright dislike the title as a whole. I actually quite liked the common route, weirdly enough. I thought the interactions between the main character Ren and his childhood friend Kasumi were pretty cute, more or less a modern version of Takeru and Sumika from Love, but much less mutually toxic. One of the final fights of the common route that you have to see before every route is Ren's fight versus Nazi Spider-Man. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of the few fights in the whole visual novel that I actually really like. It had personal stakes, wasn't too long, Nazi Spider-Man was a well-executed love-to-hate villain, and Ren had some pretty sick lines when he finally got the upper hand, summoned his admittedly pretty cool guillotine scythe weapon, and destroyed the German magic Spider-Man. The other characters that I liked quite a bit, including Ren's male childhood friend Shiro and I guess his girlfriend Eddie. Their interactions were very blunt and entertaining. I thought Shiro was kind of an unnecessary butthole to Ren and Kasumi at first, considering they're supposed to be childhood friends, but he more than fixes that later with him taking part of the only other fights I liked in this whole game, minus the Spider-Man one. Shiro basically gives the middle finger to all the stupid magic Nazi villain monologues, somehow finds a way to destroy fights despite just being a regular dude with some guns and some savage one-liners. I do have to admit, the soundtrack is pretty, as the Zoomers would say, fire. DS Irae's BGM are surprisingly catchy, whether it's the low-key slice-of-life songs or the heavy guitar and synth-heavy songs for the action scenes. Sadly, that's it for all the positives I have for DS Irae. Just about everything else was super disappointing. One main aspect about chuuni I learned through DS Irae is that apparently people like long, edgy monologues during fight scenes. While I think the fight scenes are kinda cool theoretically, to me they're ruined by the slow pacing because of the ridiculously long monologues and narration in what I was hoping to be fast-paced and fun over-the-top fight scenes. This applies to most characters, but especially the main villains, which I'll get more into later. But I think DS Irae being 80 hours between 4 routes and some important unlockable side stories was not a good sign, and unfortunately a lot of this is through the incredibly long monologues in general. But not just in fight scenes, but also through out of battle, I guess you can call world building. A lot of these monologues just feel really pretentious and trying too hard to be cool and edgy or something. I think this will be the hottest take of this video, but apparently part of the appeal of DS Irae is the pretty sizable amount of villains and amount of screen time and I guess character development and backstory they get. However, I thought they got way too much compared to what I thought would be important main heroines who rarely get anything. If they were gonna barely give the main heroines any emotional stakes or investment, why even bother making heroine routes and just instead make a linear story or maybe even a story about routes that revolve around the main villains more obviously instead? This particularly disappointed me since, as said earlier, I liked Ren and Kasumi's interactions, but after the common route, Kasumi proceeded to be extremely boring and underused. Outside maybe Kei Sakurai, the other heroines aren't much better. All 4 have likable enough personalities, but completely forgettable development, depth, and screen time. Going back to the villains though, I'm gonna be real, I do not care about any of them. I'm generally not into overly edgy villains, especially when their appeal is just supposed to be rants and over-the-top edgy powers. However, that's not enough for me. I consider their motivations extremely shallow, unrelatable, and just an excuse for different flavors of fights and maybe some drama around side switching. It's not like they don't have backstories. There's usually at least a small section for them, most likely in the unlockable side stories. It's just by the time I learn about them, I just don't care because all they've been used for at that point is just attempting to be really cool. Combine those with the extremely slow pacing of routes, especially in fight scenes, made DS Irae much more of a drag to read than I was initially expecting. Unfortunately, my 2 least favorite characters are apparently the most popular, the 2 main villains in Reinhard and Mercurius. These are the epitome of the pretentiously long monologues I don't like in this visual novel, especially when the 2 are actually able to meet up in the same scene. Anytime either of these 2 are talking, I was really tempted to just hold the control button through their dialogue because I just did not care about whatever random, pretentious, pseudo-philosophical stuff they were talking about. Okay, I've ranted enough. My point is clear. If DS Irae had a story with better plot buildup and emotional investment as well as faster pacing, I could have cared more for this game even if it was more villain focused instead of heroine focused. Sadly, despite its strong start and interesting enough premise, DS Irae just ended up being too much style over substance, with the style being too edgy and pretentious for me. Quick final side note, fuck Light for not following up on their promise for a definitive edition and having the content of the all ages side stories from Amantes, and the H scenes from Acta S Fabula not in one package, as they originally promised in their Kickstarter. I had to make a Steam guide for a somewhat optimal way to enjoy all the content in one read through.